Everyone in our town loved Evelyn. To the neighbors, she was a saint who baked pies for every new family. To the local church, she was the most generous donor. But to me, she was a shadow. When I married her son, Mark, I thought I was gaining a second mother. I didn't realize I was entering a competition I wasn't allowed to win. Evelyn had a way of making her kindness feel like a cage. She managed every detail of our wedding, from the flowers to the guest list, always saying she just wanted things to be perfect for us. Mark worshipped her. He saw her as a fragile woman who had sacrificed everything for him. I tried to fit in, to be the daughter-in-law she wanted, but I soon realized that Evelyn didn't want a daughter. She wanted an audience. Every time I tried to set a boundary, she would tear up and lean on Mark, making me look like the villain. I spent the first year of my marriage walking on eggshells, terrified that one wrong move would shatter the perfect image she had built for our family. I didn't know then that the image was already cracked. The trouble started small. It began with helpful suggestions that felt like insults. Evelyn would come over to our house while I was at work and rearrange my kitchen. "I just thought you'd want it to be more organized, dear," she would say with a thin smile. When I told Mark it made me uncomfortable, he told me I was being sensitive. Then, the comments became more personal. At Sunday dinners, she would ask if I was finally going to learn how to cook Mark's favorite meals, implying I was neglecting him. She started calling Mark 3 times a day, often claiming she had a heart flutter or a dizzy spell whenever we had plans to go out. I watched as Mark's priority shifted from our new life together back to his mother's side. I felt like a guest in my own marriage. One evening, I overheard her on the phone with Mark's best friend. She was sighing, saying how worried she was that I was spending all of Mark's hard-earned money. It was a lie. I earned more than Mark did, but the seed was planted. The saintly Evelyn was starting her work. By the second year, Evelyn was a ghost that haunted every room of our home. Even when she wasn't there, her influence was everywhere. Mark started questioning my decisions, using her words, but pretending they were his. "My mom thinks we should save for a bigger house instead of going on vacation," he'd say. Or, "My mom noticed you've been coming home late. Are you sure work is that busy?" It was a systematic erosion of my character. Evelyn was a master of the backhanded compliment. She would tell her friends how brave I was for wearing such a bold outfit, or how sweet it was that I tried so hard to keep up with the family traditions. Behind my back, the narrative was different. She told the neighbors I was cold and ungrateful. She told the church ladies she was praying for our rocky marriage. I felt like I was screaming underwater. No matter how hard I worked to be a good wife, Evelyn was always one step ahead, painting me as the woman who was dragging her golden boy down. I began to realize that as long as Evelyn was a saint, I would always be the sinner. For our 3rd anniversary, I planned a surprise weekend getaway. I booked a cabin in the mountains, miles away from cell service and, more importantly, miles away from Evelyn. Mark was excited, and for a moment, I saw the man I fell in love with again. But the morning we were supposed to leave, the phone rang. It was Evelyn. She wasn't calling to wish us a happy anniversary. She was crying, claiming she had fallen in the shower and couldn't get up. Mark panicked instantly. I suggested calling an ambulance, but he insisted we had to go over there. When we arrived, Evelyn was sitting on the sofa with a glass of tea, looking perfectly fine. She claimed her neighbor had helped her up, but she was shaken to the core. She insisted Mark stay the night because she was scared to be alone. Mark looked at me with guilt-ridden eyes and said, "We can go to the cabin tomorrow." That tomorrow never came. Evelyn spent the whole weekend recovering, making Mark serve her hand and foot. As I sat in her living room, watching her smirk at me when Mark wasn't looking, I realized this wasn't an accident. This was war. The sabotage moved from my personal life to my reputation. I am a senior accountant at a reputable firm, and my professional image is everything to me. One afternoon, my boss called me into his office. He looked uncomfortable. He told me he had received an anonymous tip that I was struggling with personal issues and might be borrowing from the petty cash. I was horrified. I have never stolen a cent in my life. I checked the office security logs and realized that Evelyn had visited the office a week prior, claiming she was dropping off a forgotten lunch for me. She had spent 10 minutes talking to the receptionist and the office manager. She didn't drop off lunch. She dropped off poison. She told them she was so worried about my shopping addiction and hoped it wouldn't affect my work. It was a calculated move to destroy my livelihood. When I confronted Mark about his mother's visit to my office, he defended her. She was just trying to be nice, Sarah. Why do you always assume the worst of her? That was the moment I knew my marriage was a sinking ship, and Mark was the one drilling holes in the hull. The final blow came during my grandmother's funeral. It was a devastating time for me, and I needed Mark more than ever. But Evelyn couldn't stand the attention being on someone else's grief. During the wake, she staged a fainting spell right next to the casket. The focus immediately shifted from my grandmother to Evelyn. Mark carried her out of the room, leaving me standing alone by the grave. When I finally got home, exhausted and heartbroken, I found Mark packing a bag. He told me he couldn't do this anymore. My mom is right, he said, his voice cold. You've become so bitter and hateful toward her. She's a saint, Sarah, and you've done nothing but attack her. I need to be with someone who respects my family. He moved back into his childhood bedroom that night. Evelyn had won. She had successfully dismantled my marriage, turned my husband against me, and kept her perfect reputation intact. She sent me a text that night. I'm so sorry it didn't work out, dear. I'll pray for you. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I sat in the silence of my empty house and felt a cold, hard resolve take root. A week after Mark left, I began packing his remaining things. I found an old laptop in the back of the guest closet. It was an old machine Evelyn had gifted to us when we first got married, claiming she didn't need it anymore. I had never used it, but now I needed to check if there were any joint tax documents on it. When I booted it up, I realized Evelyn hadn't wiped the drive. She wasn't very tech-savvy, and she had left her browser synced to her personal accounts. As I clicked through the folders, I found a hidden file labeled Finances. My heart hammered in my chest. Inside were spreadsheets, but they weren't for her household budget. They were records of the local neighborhood watch fund and the church's garden committee, both of which Evelyn chaired. I spent the entire night looking at the numbers. The math didn't add up. Evelyn had been moving small amounts of money, $50 here, $100 there, into a private account for years. The saint of the town was a common thief. But that wasn't the only thing I found. There were emails, too. Emails that showed a much darker side of the woman the world adored. The emails were a gold mine of malice. Evelyn had been writing to several people in town under various fake names. She had sent anonymous tips to the school board about a teacher she didn't like. She had sent letters to the city council reporting code violations on houses belonging to neighbors who hadn't invited her to their parties. She was a serial harasser, using her knowledge of the town to destroy anyone she deemed a threat to her social standing. But the most shocking find was a series of messages to a woman named Clara. Clara was the woman Mark had dated before me. Evelyn had used the exact same tactics on her. The lies, the professional sabotage, the fake illnesses. She had even paid a man to flirt with Clara in public so she could take photos and show Mark proof of her cheating. My jaw dropped. This wasn't just a mother-in-law who disliked me. This was a professional predator. She had a pattern. She destroyed women so she could keep her son as her perpetual caretaker. I realized then that I wasn't just fighting for my marriage. I was fighting for the truth. Every year, the town held a Founders Gala to celebrate local leaders. This year, Evelyn was the guest of honor. She was being given the Lifetime Achievement Award for her decades of charity work and community service. It was the perfect stage. Everyone who mattered would be there. The mayor, the chief of police, the local press, and every neighbor who had ever doubted me. Mark would be there, too, standing proudly by his mother's side as she accepted her trophy. I knew this was my only chance. If I went to the police now, she would use her saint status to claim I was a bitter ex-wife framing her. I needed the court of public opinion. I needed to show the town exactly who was behind the mask. I contacted the gala organizers. I told them I wanted to create a special tribute video for Evelyn as a surprise peace offering. Because they knew me as her daughter-in-law, they agreed instantly. They even gave me full access to the digital projector system. Evelyn thought she was going to have her greatest night. She was right, but not for the reason she thought. I spent the next 2 weeks working like a woman possessed. I didn't just want to expose her. I wanted it to be undeniable. I contacted Clara, Mark's ex. When I showed her the emails I found, she broke down in tears. She agreed to give me a recorded statement about what Evelyn had done to her. I also reached out to the teacher who had lost his job because of the anonymous tips. Slowly, I gathered a chorus of voices, people whose lives Evelyn had quietly ruined while she smiled in their faces. I compiled the bank statements, the emails, and the video testimonials into one seamless presentation. I titled the file The Real Evelyn. Meanwhile, I stayed quiet. I didn't answer Mark's texts. I didn't respond to Evelyn's pity voicemails. I let them think I was defeated. On the night of the gala, I dressed in my best black dress. I looked like I was going to a funeral. In a way, I was going to the funeral of Evelyn's reputation. As I walked into the ballroom, I saw her in the center of the room, glowing in a gold dress, basking in the light of 1,000 lies. The ballroom was packed with the elite of our town. Crystal chandeliers sparkled, and the smell of expensive perfume filled the air. Evelyn was at the head table, flanked by the mayor and a very proud-looking Mark. When she saw me walk in, her eyes narrowed for a split second before she plastered on a look of concerned sympathy. She whispered something to Mark, who looked over at me with a mix of pity and annoyance. I ignored them and went straight to the tech booth. The young man running the lights recognized me. "Ready for the surprise, Sarah?" he asked. I nodded, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. "It's going to be a night she never forgets," I told him. I handed him the thumb drive. The ceremony began with long, boring speeches about community and sacrifice. Finally, the mayor stood up. "And now, to honor a woman who is the very heart of our community, we have a special presentation prepared by her devoted daughter-in-law." The lights dimmed. The room went silent. Evelyn smoothed her dress and smiled, ready for her close-up. The video started exactly how everyone expected. Soft, piano music played as photos of Evelyn appeared on the giant screen. There she was at the 1995 bake sale. There she was hugging a child at the hospital. The crowd oohed and awed. I saw Mark reach over and squeeze her hand. Evelyn looked like she was about to cry tears of joy. "Evelyn has always been there for us," my voiceover said over the speakers. "She knows everything about this town. She knows your secrets. She knows your weaknesses. And she knows how to use them." The music suddenly shifted. The soft piano was replaced by a low, distorted bass tone. The photo of Evelyn smiling at the hospital froze and began to pixelate. The screen turned blood red, and a single sentence appeared in bold, white letters. "Who is the real Evelyn?" The room went deathly quiet. I looked at the head table. Evelyn's smile had vanished. Mark was leaning forward, squinting at the screen, his face pale in the red light. The real show was about to begin. The screen jumped to a recorded Skype call. It was Clara. "My name is Clara, and Evelyn destroyed my life," she began. She detailed the harassment, the fake photos, and the lies that ended her engagement to Mark. The crowd gasped. Before they could process it, the screen shifted to the anonymous emails. I had highlighted the metadata that showed they were sent from Evelyn's home IP address. One by one, the victims appeared on screen. The teacher, who was fired. The neighbor whose business was harassed by random inspections. Then came the bank statements. Huge red circles appeared around the money being moved from the charity fund to Evelyn's private account. "Over $40,000, the voiceover stated. "Stolen from the children you thought you were helping." The murmurs in the room grew into a roar of shock. I looked at Evelyn. She wasn't fragile anymore. She was standing up, her face twisted in rage, screaming at the tech booth to shut it off. But the tech was under my instructions. He didn't stop. The final part of the video was the most devastating. It was a recording I had made with a hidden camera in my kitchen a week before Mark left. It showed Evelyn sitting at my table, thinking she was alone with me. "You think Mark loves you?" she sneered on the giant screen. "He loves the version of me I let him see. I made him, and I can break you. I've done it before, and I'll do it again. By the time I'm finished, no one in this town will even look at you." The video ended with a shot of Evelyn smirking and taking a sip of tea. The lights in the ballroom slammed on. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. Every eye in the room turned toward the head table. Evelyn was panting, her gold dress looking like a costume. The mayor moved away from her as if she were contagious. Mark was staring at his mother like he was seeing a stranger for the first time. The saint was gone. In her place stood a bitter, exposed thief. Evelyn tried to play her last card. She clutched her chest and began to wail. "This is a lie. She's crazy. Mark, help me, my heart." She collapsed back into her chair, waiting for Mark to rush to her side like he always did. But Mark didn't move. He looked at the screen, then at the bank statements still glowing in the background, then at the faces of the neighbors who were now looking at his mother with disgust. "Mark, honey, call an ambulance," she shrieked. Mark finally spoke, his voice trembling. "The IP addresses, Mom. The bank accounts."
"How?
"Why?" Evelyn's act faltered. Seeing that her son wasn't falling for it, she stood up, her weakness miraculously gone. "I did it for you," she yelled, her voice echoing in the hall. "I did it to protect you from these women who weren't good enough." That was the final confession the room needed. The chief of police, who was sitting at table 4, stood up and adjusted his belt. He walked slowly toward the head table. The saint was about to be handled like any other criminal. The chief of police didn't make a scene, but he didn't have to. "Evelyn, we're going to need to have a very long talk about those charity funds," he said calmly. Evelyn tried to push past him, but 2 other officers blocked the exit. The Lifetime Achievement Award sat forgotten on the table, a piece of cheap plastic that meant nothing now. As they led her out of the ballroom, she looked back at me. There was no more pretend kindness. Her eyes were full of pure, unadulterated hatred. I stood my ground and looked her right in the face. I didn't feel happy, but I felt light. The weight of her lies had been transferred from my shoulders back onto hers. The crowd parted for her as she was escorted out, the silence broken only by the clicking of her heels and the occasional whisper of "How could she?" Mark sat at the table with his head in his hands. He was the only one who didn't watch her leave. His world hadn't just been shaken, it had been deleted. The gala ended early, but the story was just beginning. By the next morning, the saint of the town was the lead story in the local paper. The headline read, "Charity Leader Exposed, Embezzlement and Harassment Scandal." The evidence I had provided was so overwhelming that the police didn't even need a search warrant for her house. She had left a trail of digital breadcrumbs everywhere. People she had bullied for years began coming forward. The garden committee was disbanded, and the neighborhood watch demanded an audit of all their books. I stayed at a friend's house for a few days, avoiding the media circus. Mark called me dozens of times, but I wasn't ready to talk. He had spent years choosing his mother over his wife. He had watched her mistreat me and told me I was the problem. The truth had set me free, but it had left him in the wreckage of a life built on a lie. I realized that my marriage wasn't ruined by a mother-in-law. It was ruined by a husband who refused to see the truth. 3 days later, Mark showed up at my door. He looked terrible. He hadn't shaved, and his eyes were bloodshot. "Sarah, please," he whispered when I opened the door. "I am so sorry. I was blind. I thought I was protecting a good woman, but I was just a tool for her." He told me he had moved out of her house and was staying in a motel. He had seen the files on the laptop himself and realized that everything I had said for 3 years was true. He begged for a second chance. He promised we could move away, start over, and never speak to her again. I looked at him and felt a strange sense of distance. I remembered the nights I cried myself to sleep while he was at her house. I remembered the anniversary she ruined and the funeral she mocked. "Mark," I said softly, "you didn't believe me when I told you the truth. You only believed me when the whole world saw the evidence. That's not a partnership. That's a tragedy." I didn't let him in. Evelyn's legal troubles grew by the day. The embezzlement charges were just the tip of the iceberg. Several of the people she had harassed filed civil lawsuits for defamation and emotional distress. Her perfect house was put up for sale to cover her legal fees. The woman who once ruled the town social scene was now a pariah. She was under house arrest, waiting for her court date. I heard from a mutual friend that she spent her days calling anyone who would listen, claiming I had hacked her computer and fabricated the evidence. But no one believed her anymore. The saint had used up all her miracles. Even her oldest friends refused to visit her. She had built her life on the idea that she was better than everyone else, and now she was lower than the people she had looked down on. I felt a sense of closure I hadn't expected. I had destroyed her image, but I hadn't lied once. I simply turned on the lights and let everyone see what was already there. I finally went back to our marital home to finish packing. It felt different now. The air felt cleaner, like a storm had passed and washed away the dust. As I folded my clothes, I found a small gift Evelyn had given me for my birthday, a world's best daughter-in-law mug. I looked at it for a long time. It was the perfect symbol of her deception. She had given me a trophy while she was trying to destroy my career. I walked to the kitchen and dropped it into the trash can. It shattered into a dozen pieces. I realized that for years I had been trying to glue a broken relationship together while the person on the other side was swinging a hammer. I wasn't just leaving a marriage. I was leaving a war zone. I signed the divorce papers that afternoon. Mark didn't fight me on anything. He gave me the house, the car, and everything we had built. It was his way of apologizing, but it was too little, too late. Before she was sent to prison, Evelyn requested to see me. Her lawyer said she wanted to make peace. I went to the jail, not because I wanted peace, but because I wanted to see her one last time without her mask. We sat on opposite sides of the glass. She looked older, smaller, and very bitter. "You think you won," she hissed into the phone. "But you've destroyed my son's life. He's a shell of a man because of you." I looked at her calmly. "No, Evelyn," I said. "He's a shell of a man because you never let him grow into one. You fed him lies and kept him weak so you could be his hero. I didn't destroy your image. I just showed the world the real you. And it turns out, the real you is very ugly." She started to scream, banging on the glass, her face turning purple. The guards had to restrain her. As I walked away, I realized that I didn't hate her anymore. I just felt sorry for her. She was a woman who could have had a real family, but she chose a fake image instead. I moved to a new city 3 months later. I took a job at a firm where no one knew my name or my history. I started going to therapy to deal with the years of gaslighting and emotional abuse. It wasn't easy, but for the first time in my life, I felt like I was breathing real air. I learned that I wasn't sensitive or crazy. I was a person who had been targeted by a master manipulator. I started making friends who liked me for who I was, not because I was someone's wife or daughter-in-law. I spent my weekends hiking, reading, and rediscovering the hobbies Evelyn had convinced me were a waste of time. My life was no longer about managing someone else's ego. It was about building my own happiness. I felt like I had been asleep for years and had finally woken up. The world was bigger and brighter than Evelyn had ever allowed me to believe. Mark moved away, too. He sent me an email a year later. He was living in a small town 2 states away, working a quiet job. He told me he was in counseling and was trying to understand why he had let his mother control him for so long. He said he hadn't spoken to Evelyn since she was sentenced to 5 years in prison for her financial crimes. He apologized again, not for the divorce, but for the man he had been. "I hope you find someone who chooses you every single day," he wrote, "because I know now that I never did." I didn't reply, but I wished him well. He was a victim of Evelyn's perfection, too. He was the golden boy who was never allowed to tarnish, and in the end, he had lost everything because of it. I hoped he would find his own truth, far away from the shadow of the saint. Back in our old town, the story of the Gallo exposure became a local legend. It was used as a cautionary tale about the dangers of blind trust. The charity funds were eventually recovered and put to good use, helping the very families Evelyn had ignored. A new woman took over the garden committee, and for the first time in years, The community felt like a community again, not a hierarchy. People realized that perfect is usually a lie. Real kindness doesn't need a pedestal, and real love doesn't require a victim. I sometimes get messages from people back home, thanking me for having the courage to speak up. They tell me how much better things are now that the queen has been dethroned. I realize now that my revenge wasn't about being mean. It was about restoration. I restored the truth to a town that had been living in a lie. I am sitting on my porch now, watching the sunset. My life isn't perfect, and I don't want it to be. It's real. It's messy, and it's mine. I learned that the most dangerous people aren't the ones who scream and shout. They're the ones who smile while they pull the rug out from under you. They are the ones who use their goodness as a weapon. But I also learned that no image is indestructible. The truth is a quiet force, but it is a powerful one. If you are living in a shadow, don't be afraid to turn on the light. It might destroy the image of the people around you, but it will save your soul. My mother-in-law tried to ruin my marriage, and in a way, she succeeded. But in the process, she gave me the tools to destroy her facade and build a life that is finally, beautifully my own. The saint is in a cell, and I am finally free.